everyone. Today, I am delighted to introduce you to Reverend Daiko Matsuyama of Taizoin Temple, which is part of Myoshinji Temple in Kyoto, Japan. I met Reverend Matsuyama at a social club, just like Rick, but not exclusively for females, and has been impressed by his works as an inspiring religious figure in Japan. He has published about 7 books, 2 of which I have with me now. He has one is about a way of life, and I especially recommend to those who find Ikigai, the best-selling book in India and elsewhere, interesting. Reverend Matsuyama has a strong connection with Bhutan, as he was entrusted to work on restoration of old temples there, with the patronage of a grandmother of the current king Wanchuk, and thus he formed and led a team of Japanese carpenters who specialize in restoration of old temples to Bhutan. Upon a completion of the restoration of one of these temples, he kindly offered some of the members of the club we both belong to join in the ceremony in Bhutan about a year and a half ago. And I was supposed to join the group, but unfortunately had to cancel. When I asked him to give a talk for WIC members last November, he was in the midst of giving an online 30-hour course for Stanford University students. I found out the course was on Zen, a way of life through meditation and cooking. How interesting. He apparently taught a class on Zen cooking, which is basically veggie cooking with monk's mindset. I wish I was able to take his course. Maybe we can ask him again to give a talk for us so that we can appreciate a taste of his intensive cooking course, which he taught at Stanford University. There is 3.5-hour time difference between India and Japan. So it must be around 2:30, as Grace was saying, in Kyoto, well after lunch for Reverend Matsuyama. Namaste, Reverend Daiko Matsuyama.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So thank you very much for giving me such a precious opportunity to give you a talk. So as you guys introduced me, I am a Zen Buddhist priest in Kyoto. And so today my lecture is about Zen and the Japanese gardens. And so Zen is, of course, the sector of Buddhism, and Buddhism and Zen also created in India. So India is our home country. And so I'm very delighted to give a talk in the members of our home country. So now I'd like to start from introduction of the temple and a short introduction of myself. And I'd like to share the 1-minute video of our temple. So I'd like to give you the link of the movie to Stevie. So would you please share the video? Thank you very much. So I'd like to share the material with you. So, so this is our temple. So our temple is called as Myoshinji Temple Complex. So we are the headquarters of the Rinzai Zen sectors in Japan. and we're founded around 650 years ago. And we have around 3,400 branch temples all over Japan and one in India. And so you can see the map of the complex on the right. So we consist of 46 small temples in the complex. And the size of the temple is almost 100 acres. So the biggest temple in Kyoto city area and the biggest Zen temple in Japan. And one of the small temple is my temple, Taizo-in. So Taizo-in was founded in 1404 by the third head priest of the complex. And the name of the temple, Taizo, comes from the teachings of Zen, which means hidden virtues. So of course we have to make a lot of virtues, but we should not show off. So we should keep them secret, hide. So this is the very important teachings of Buddhism, and the names comes from these teachings. And so we have some treasures and in the temple. So this is our Buddha Hall. So this Buddha Hall was built in 1597, so 420 years ago, and designated as national important cultural properties. So in the Buddha Hall, so you can find very interesting the pictures. So which is called as hyonenzu. So actually, this is all these ink and brush paintings in Japan. So this picture is designated as a national treasure. And this picture is about the controversial questions for the sake of the enlightenment. We are still using special monies for trainings. So so the picture of the question. The picture of the question. So you can see a man is standing in the center, and he's holding a small gold kind of water bottle. And you can see a big catfish is swimming in the river. So the question is, how do you catch this huge, big catfish with the tiny bottle, small bottle? It's impossible, but we have to find answers through trainings. So this question was created around 600 years ago by the fourth shogun Rev Matsuyama, whose name is Ashikaga Yoshimochi, and whose father is very famous and powerful man, whose name is Ashikaga Yoshimitsu, who built Golden Temple in Kyoto. So his father is very powerful in politics and economics, but he didn't succeed his part to his son. So his son gradually interested in Buddhism and art, and he finally became a Buddhist priest. And among his colleagues, whose name was Joseph Zuen, who went to China and studied Buddhism and art, and he introduced ink and brush paintings into Japan for the first time. So that's why the shogun asked him to draw his question into this picture. So that's what this is, all these ink and brush paintings in Japan. And at that time, there are 31 very famous noble Zen priests in Kyoto city area, and shogun ordered all of them to solve this question. And you can see many Chinese characters on the left. So in the picture, so on top. So these are the 31 different answers by these priests for this question. So I can give you some examples. So the catfish is very slippery. So why don't you put some oil on the surface of the bottle, and it may suddenly sink into the bottle. It's impossible. And another example is catfish. Let's make a clear soup of the catfish. But how can cook rice? So let's cook rice with the sun on the riverbank. So it's also incomprehensible. So all these answers are impossible or incomprehensible in logics. But this question implies something. So this big catfish implies something big. For example, your big dreams, enlightenment. And the small bottle implies something small. For example, yourself, your human beings. So this question can be converted. How do you get enlightenment? Or how do you get your big dreams? Of course, there's no logical answer. So we have to find the answer for ourselves through our trainings, how it works. So that is what this question wants to do the most. And we call this kind of a question as koan. Koan means official questions. So if we say the enlightenment is a form, the question is a finger that directs to the moon. So if you look at on the finger, you can see the moon. So what count is a direction of the finger. So implication of the questions. So this kind of the trainings comes from the times of the Buddha in India. So, in India, you have rainy season, very heavy rains. So they couldn't go out. So they have the custom to discuss in the shelters. So we are still using this kind of the trainings in our monasteries. And so so we're Zen Buddhist. So as I said, Zen and Buddhism also created in India. So Buddhism itself was created in India around 2,500 years ago. And Zen was created also in India around 2,000 years ago and introduced to China around 1,500 years ago by the Bodhidharma. In Japanese, he's called as Dharma-san. And then it was flourished in China in Tang and Song dynasties. And it was introduced to Japan around 1,000 years ago. So born in India, raised in China, and introduced to Japan. But I'm afraid there's almost no more the original style of the Zen, nor in India, nor in China. Zen was also survived only in part of Vietnam, Korea, and Japan. And now Zen is again spreading to the world. And Zen is, especially Japanese Zen is very much influenced by the Chinese religions, especially Confucianism and Taoism. And the biggest difference between the original Indian Zen and the Japanese Zen, present Japanese Zen, is that the concept of labor. So in India, the Buddha said the Buddhist priest should not involve in labor, so inclusive of the cultivation or other labors. But in China, so they highly cherish labor, even for the religious practitioners. So there is a very famous story in China about 1,200 years ago. So there is a very famous master at the age of 80, and he has a lot of young disciples. But the master was always cleaning their precincts and gardens, so every day, and even he was at the age of 80. So one day, one of the disciples were worrying about his health, and he hid the sweepers and the equipments for the cleaning of the masters. And then masters suddenly stopped eating. And these disciples were worrying about his health also. And one of the disciples asked him why he stopped eating. And the master replied that if he does not work for a day, he has no right to eat for a day. So this is very famous teachings. So in China, they highly value the labor. So in Japanese present Zens, we highly value the labor, and especially the gardens, gardening and cleaning. And so, the cleaning, the gardening in the monastery is one of the most important activities. So the Zen and the Japanese garden are very much, how can I say, deep relationships. So that's why I'm appointed to the lecturer today about the Japanese gardens. And the other important, how can I say, information about Zen is that as Yuka-san introduced me, from 3 years ago, I am appointed as a visiting lecturer at Stanford University in the US. And so last year, I went to California in February, just before the COVID-19 was spreading to in US. And every time I go to US or Western countries, the Zen or mindfulness are very popular. But I also find that Zen or mindfulness in Western world is different from traditional Zens in Asian countries, like the difference of sushi. So I don't want to say which is good, which is bad, but it's different. I think that the biggest difference from the mindfulness or Zen in Western countries in Asia and in Western countries that so in West, Zen or the mindfulness are accepted in a very utilitarian ways. So they practice Zen or the mindfulness to gain something. So better performances, better job, big money. But in Japan, we do not practice Zen in that way. So I think it is something like the running. Running is also very popular in the Western countries in Japan, maybe in India. And for example, in Kyoto, we can see many runners running around along Kamo River or the Imperial Palace. And the most of them, their motivation is something like they want to lose their weight, they want to run faster, and they want to make their body stronger. But I think these are the kind of the Western motivations. But the real, the traditional Zen motivation should be we run just to run. So of course, by running, our weight may lose, our body gets stronger. But these are not the purposes. These are something extras. So the only goal of the Zen training is that we try to clarify the self. So what is a self? So this is the only goal of the practitioners of Zens. So I think this is a biggest difference between the present mindfulness in the West and the traditional Zens comes from the Indian philosophies. And now I'd like to start the lecture of Japanese garden. But so first, I'd like to enjoy the movies of the Japanese gardens of NHK program. And so I'd like to share the 27-minute the videos on YouTube from now. But I'm sorry about the from 9 minutes to 9 minutes 20 seconds to 10 minutes. So for 40 seconds, it misses the sounds. So for 40 minutes, so we have no sounds. I'm sorry, but it's a very good program to understand basic idea of Japanese gardens. So now I'd like to ask to Stevie-san to share the link. So just wait for a moment, please. Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you.
The Japanese garden embodies the art of evoking nature's majesty within a compact space. From tea gardens to the dry gardens of Zen Buddhism to the pocket gardens of city dwellers, Japanese culture has produced many styles of garden. The earliest ones in the 7th century were ritual spaces. Later, gardens took on an aesthetic and social role. In recent times, gardens have even sprung up on roofs and balconies. This time, our theme is Japanese gardens. We'll see the role that gardens have played in the Japanese way of life.
It's a pretty stunning view, isn't it? It's a Japanese-style garden. Hello and welcome to Japanology Plus. I'm Peter Barakan. I'm in Osaka today, and this is in the middle of a big park commemorating the expo that was held here in Osaka in 1970, and which was partially responsible for introducing modern Japan to the world. This Japanese garden was created for the expo, and it's actually a number of different gardens in the style of 4 different eras, almost like a kind of garden theme park, if you like. When I was a kid in London, the word garden conjured up images of flowers more than anything else. But flowers are one thing you're not going to really see in a Japanese garden. What you will see are things like large ponds and rocks arranged in artful ways, and the whole feeling is rather tranquil and subdued. Well, obviously the Japanese were proud enough of their gardens that they gave them a special place in the World's Fair. Let's see what makes them so special.
Japanese gardens use natural materials to evoke majestic oceans, mountains, hills and rivers on a smaller scale. There are three main styles of traditional garden. The most typical one features a pond or stream at the center, providing a scene of water. This pond, for example, represents the ocean, surrounded by mounds of earth that serve as mountains. It's a typical Japanese landscape, and many gardens are designed in this style. Another style is the classic dry garden, which uses no water at all. Instead, water is represented by arrangements of rocks and gravel. A ledge of bare rock suggests a waterfall, a bed of white gravel rushing waters. In Zen Buddhism, contemplating these gardens is considered a path to enlightenment. The third style of traditional Japanese garden is the tea garden, developed as an extension of the tea ceremony. As guests approach the tea room, the garden conjures up an image of a remote setting deep in the forest, a mountain retreat where the clamor of ordinary life is left behind. Japanese gardens have three primary elements: stone, water, and trees. The stone is usually not dressed. Instead, rocks are used in their natural state, color, and shape. Rocks jutting up from a pond represent islands in the sea. And stones at the water's edge, a rocky seashore. A number of rocks may be placed together to portray a waterfall. Trees representing forests and mountains are pruned, but in a way that preserves a natural appearance. Stone, water, and trees. These three elements are combined to present in a garden the natural scenery of Japan.
So let me introduce you to our guest for today, Mr. Takahiro Naka, who travels all over Japan researching Japanese gardens. Hello, nice to meet you, and thank you for being with us today.
I'm glad to be here.
This garden is really beautiful. I'm sure if the ones we're going to be seeing during the day are as good as this, it's going to be a very pleasant day.
There are various styles of Japanese garden. We'll see quite a few examples of them today.
Today's guest, Takahiro Naka, is a professor of garden history and an authority on Japanese gardens. Naka is actively involved in surveying and restoring heritage gardens and has been a part of garden design projects around the country. He publishes books and gives lectures, drawing on his encyclopedic knowledge of Japanese gardens.
So what kind of a garden do we have here?
As you can see, a pond takes pride of place. This is known as a pond garden. It's based on the types of gardens built by the Japanese aristocracy of 1,000 or more years ago. They provide the inspiration for this one.
And how would they have used the garden? What would they have done here? Do we know that?
In that period, the emperor had gardens built. The aristocrats of his court had gardens as well. The gardens were used for ceremonies of state and also for the recreation of the emperor and his court. They would recite poems, have drinking parties, take a boat out on the pond to look at the moon. They would do things like that.
Of course, there are landscape gardens in the West as well. They're very different from the Japanese ones too. Perhaps we could talk a little bit about those differences.
The biggest difference is the importance of symmetry in a traditional Western garden. For example, one of the pinnacles of Western garden design is at the Palace of Versailles. From the main structure, the palace building, there is a straight walk that seems to extend out to the horizon. And then, with that walk as an axis, you have flower beds on both sides in perfect symmetry. You also have fountains, and another feature is that the trees are evenly spaced. The trees are pruned into perfect cones. It's all very geometric and formal.
So it's very obviously man-made.
Yes, that's right. Both Western and Japanese gardens represent an idealized space, an idealized world. Take Versailles. The garden represents the authority of the king. It expresses the king's will to impose order on a chaotic world with his great power. This is what you see in this symmetry, this balance of left and right, and also the immaculate pruning. Japan has its roots in rice paddy agriculture, and if you want to grow crops, water is an essential element, of course. The water flows down from the mountains, forming into rivers, which flow down to the sea. And from there, the water goes back to the mountains as rain. That idealized order is what the Japanese garden expresses.
Are there any other major characteristics of Japanese gardens?
Yes, there's a technique that's used to make the garden vista seem more expansive. It's called borrowed scenery. The garden of the temple Entsuji in Kyoto is a famous example of this. In that case, you have a rectangular moss garden next to the temple building. There's a hedge at the back, and a row of trees which frames a distant view of a sacred mountain, Hiezan. It's like the mountain is drawn into the garden. The remote mountain and the garden right in front of you fuse, and the garden seems to stretch way out into the distance.
They liked landscapes that brought the sea to mind. This is how the idea of a garden as an idealized natural landscape in miniature emerged. That design tradition continues to this day. Several new styles of garden appeared in the early 17th century. The shogun ordered all the feudal lords to have residences in Edo, now Tokyo. There, the lords competed to create lavish gardens in their urban estates, and some examples remain today. Koishikawa Korakuen was built in the 17th century by a powerful regional leader. Let's take a stroll through it. You enter the woods to the sound of water. It's called Shiraito no Taki, literally Silk Thread Falls. Here at the foot of Mount Fuji is the real Shiraito Falls. The garden recreates the falls in miniature. Beyond the waterfall, we come to a stream. Looking along this river, we see a bridge. It is modeled on a well-known bridge in Kyoto. Moving on, we come to a spot inspired by Tofukuji, a Kyoto temple famous for its autumn foliage. The garden is a showcase of Japan's most celebrated vistas. In centuries past, it was no easy task to travel around Japan, so regional lords recreated famous sites in their own gardens and invited guests to experience a kind of travel by proxy. Japanese gardens came to be important places for socializing, recreation, and relaxation.
So what kind of a garden is this one here?
This garden is modeled on a type of stroll garden. The original style was popular in the 17th and 18th centuries during the Edo period. Miniature versions of famous scenic landscapes from across Japan are dotted around the pond. They come into view one after another as you take your stroll around it.
Were gardens like this common in the Edo period?
In those days, Edo, which is what Tokyo was called then, contained the estates of about 300 feudal lords. In fact, each lord basically had 3 different estates in the city. So if 300 lords each made 3 gardens, there were nearly 1,000 gardens in all.
Are there any specific examples you can give of some that were particularly interesting?
The Tokugawa clan of the Owari domain built a large garden called the Toyama-so. It contained a full-scale recreation of a city street with tea houses and other shops. On that street, you could sort of pretend you were going shopping in town.
So it's like a kind of theme park?
Yes, very much like a theme park. And some other gardens took advantage of the terrain of the city, such as Hama-rikyu, which still exists today. It was right by the Edo Bay, Tokyo Bay today. As you know, the water level of the bay rises and falls with the tide. When the tide is high, water flows into the pond from the bay. And when it's low, the water pours out. This flow brings in fish. The Lord and his VIP friends may have gone fishing in that pond.
So was entertaining the shogun actually an important function of these gardens?
They also had practical uses as well. In the early years of the 17th century, there was a massive fire in the city of Edo. Apparently, the flames were fanned by winds blowing in from the northwest. The fire spread. To prevent that from happening again, the shogun had the estates of his 3 closest retainers placed in that direction and ordered them to make huge gardens. They built embankments and also ponds that would provide water for firefighting. So, in that way, the gardens actually contributed to public safety. That was another role of the feudal lords' gardens.
And were any of these gardens in the Edo period open to the public as well?
Some merchants did build gardens that were open to the public for a fee. One in Tokyo is Mukojima Hyakkaen. That was in the early 19th century. One of the people's favorite pastimes was looking at flowers in bloom. All kinds of flowers were planted in the garden, and people came from all over the city to see them. Visitors would recite poems about whatever flowers were in season, or they might paint them. People could also simply enjoy each other's company there.
The Edo period was a time of peace, and the economy flourished. Well-to-do urban merchants began cultivating small gardens at home.
We're in Kyoto now, and we're going to be looking at the kind of garden that was popular in private houses during the Edo period. Now, Naka-san, I know that this kind of house is called a machiya. Perhaps you could explain for us what kind of a structure a machiya is.
Well, machiya literally means townhouse, and they were homes for townspeople in Kyoto. But they were not simply homes, they were also places of business. It's your home and your workplace in one. They don't have a very wide facade, so you might think they're small, but they go back a long way in an extended box shape. This was the space where business was conducted, the shop area. Here is the front hall. This is where guests of the residence would enter.
Okay, so here's the garden. It's kind of like a little patio, isn't it?
Space is limited, as you can see. These are compact pocket gardens, courtyard gardens. One role is to make the house brighter. This plant is called lady palm. It's green all year round. So the guests have entered, and here the host greets them properly. That's the function of this space. The garden offers a tranquil setting for greeting guests.
Yeah, there's something very refreshing about it. Yeah. And another garden.
This one is right outside the master's own room.
Well, this is the private garden.
Yes, it is. It's much more formal.
So, how does this work with the two gardens?
Well, the townhouse is long and narrow, and Kyoto has a hot and humid summer. In addition to bringing in light, these courtyard gardens improve air circulation. In this machiya, there's one here at the rear of the house and one at the entrance. You have two areas of exposed ground. That helps the breeze to flow through.
The two gardens are laid out so that one gets sunlight all day, while the other is always in the shade. There's a natural temperature difference, which results in circulation of air through the house.
There's a casual, almost kind of random look to the way things are arranged in here, but I'm thinking back to some of the gardens that we've seen already, and I'm guessing there's probably quite a lot of care has gone into the way this is designed.
At first glance, it doesn't seem to be much to look at. But it features some exceptional garden rocks, as well as some artful stone ornaments. That greenish rock over there represents the owner's concern for his family.
Oh, really?
Yes. Its shape evokes a crane with its head turned to rest on its back. And the black stone, at the back of the garden, it's said to resemble a turtle. In Japanese folklore, the crane represents a lifespan of 1,000 years and the turtle 10,000 years. They're auspicious creatures. So placing rocks suggestive of these creatures was the owner's way of expressing a hope that his business would flourish and his family would live long and healthy lives. That's the kind of wish they embodied.
That's actually pretty nice, yeah.
Matt Auld here, and today I'm in Saitama Prefecture, just outside of Tokyo, to learn the ancient art of Japanese rock gardening from a master of the craft. He lives right around the corner, so let's go drop by and see if he can teach me a few tricks. Hello! I'm here to learn about Japanese rock gardens.
I'm Hisayuki Wada. I'll be your instructor.
Where's the garden?
Right here.
What? It's so small.
This is a tabletop version of a dry garden. Let's get started. First, you use this rake. If you drag it lightly across the sand in a wavy line, it looks like a river.
Very cool. Yeah, it looks just like a river.
Drag it around, and you can create a circle like this. Then place a stone. It looks like an island in the sea.
Look at that. Yes, it does.
Now, if I move the rake more roughly, it becomes a bank of clouds. And then the rocks become mountain peaks, protruding up through the clouds.
I see. I get it. Okay, okay.
Each stone has a front and back, a top and bottom. I can place it this way to represent an island, or stand it up to make a mountain. Using these techniques, you can create all kinds of landscapes. And we also have these things too. You can have fun with these little objects.
Okay, well, let's get started. I'm going to draw... Oops.
Nicely done.
No, no, no. I'll put this one here. A bridge. Let's put that over the river here.
That's nice.
Just like that. Here. Two tanuki. Look at that.
Very good. Excellent.
Really? I call this turtles versus tanuki.
In the end, only you really get your vision for your garden. As long as you're happy with it, you've done it right.
Yeah, it's true. I think I'm about the only person in the world who understands this garden. And there you have it. If somebody like me with absolutely no gardening talent can pull this off, so can you. Next time you come to Japan, give it a try yourself.
Tokyo's residential neighborhoods are packed with houses, but a closer look reveals that almost every house has a patch of green. These are gardens. No matter how tiny the space available, people love to have a garden of some kind. Here we are in a residential suburb of Tokyo, where detached homes line the street. Let's take a look at one of the gardens here. It's small but very beautiful. Michiko Koyama really wanted a garden, so 15 years ago she moved from a flat to this home, where she works a plot of 3 square meters. It's a super miniature garden, but it still manages to incorporate Japanese elements.
I like it when there are flowers blooming, even if it's just a tiny space. After working in the garden, I feel so relaxed. I feel so glad to have a garden.
Here's a very different setting, the heart of central Tokyo, where there's almost no free space. But one woman has turned her roof into a garden. It occupies a 66 square meter rooftop and contains various flowers and trees. The owner, Masayo Imai, has spent 20 years cultivating this space. She even has a tiny pond. The sound of running water helps to create a place where she can relax.
The space is very important.
It really is. It's the best spot in the house.
Here in Fukuoka is an example of how even with a small flat, you can still find space for a garden. After pondering how to create some kind of garden, the owners turned their balcony into a 9 square meter space with a bamboo fence and pea gravel. They love it. They find it very soothing to be able to look out on a genuine Japanese-style garden. Even as lifestyles have changed, the Japanese have continued to cherish their gardens.
We've seen just in the park here several different forms of gardens, and then in the video there were again some small ones, some tiny ones even. But it's obvious that the Japanese people do seem to like to have some kind of a garden in their lives. What do you think that's about?
Well, first of all, water is something that we can't live without. Japan's origins are as an agrarian society. We've always relied on nature's bounty. Sometimes nature brings typhoons, floods, and other disasters. So, in a sense, both our happiness and our suffering are tied up with nature. That led people to respect nature and pray that it wouldn't unleash its fury. Nature became something that people were always conscious of. And I believe the Japanese dedication to gardens is one manifestation of that.
I know that there are several cases of Japanese-style gardens being created in other countries as well. Is that something that's on the increase now?
In the West, people have become fascinated with Japanese gardens, and various examples have been built in various countries. I believe garden design embodies the culture of a country. It's a distillation of cultural values. Through the medium of the garden, Japanese culture and the Japanese view of nature can be shared with people in other countries. At the same time, looking the other way, in Japan you find gardens made in various Western styles. English gardens, for example, and French gardens as well. By understanding other countries' gardens, we understand their cultures better. I think garden design can play a big role in cross-cultural understanding.
Thank you very much. It's been a very pleasant day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So
Thank you very much.
now I'd like to continue my presentation. Excuse me. So as to the gardens, so we have three types of gardens, as they said in the video. Number one, dry gardens. Number two, pond gardens. And number three, tea gardens. And the comparison of the gardens compared with Western gardens. So Western gardens are basically symmetrical, but Japanese gardens are asymmetrical. And in Western gardens, for example, in the palace, the border between inside and outside of the room is very clear. But in Japanese gardens, so we have we call a terrace as engawa or gazebos. We have these kind of the unclear borders. So we highly cherish the access to the nature. So the access to the nature is very easy. And the third thing is, as in the videos they said also, that the Western garden looks very man-made, artificial. But in Japanese gardens, so in Japanese gardens world, there is a saying that we try to make the garden as the intention of unintentions. So the ideal the gardens like the deep in the mountains, the waterfall, very quiet, the birds singing. So nature is the ideal, but it's impossible to have the real nature in the center of the cities. So, but we try to make the gardens looks very natural. Of course, it is man-made, artificial, but we try to make it natural. So we say intention of unintention. So, so I'd like to explain you in detail from the dry gardens. So dry gardens are created in Zen temples around 600 or 700 years ago in Kyoto. And as I said, the Japanese Zen were very much influenced by Chinese religions like Confucianism and Taoism. And especially in Taoism, the ideal place for the training is like in the nature, deep in the mountain, foggy, mystical. So this kind of the place. But it's impossible to have this kind of the ideal place in the city, in the temple. So they try to create something similar to that place. So if we have plenty of water, so we can use the water and we can create pond strolling type of gardens. But I'm afraid like our complex, Myoshinji or Daitokuji complex, we are located in the central part of the Kyoto cities. So we do not have plenty of water. So that's why, so they wanted to create something similar to that kind of the pond garden. So they used the sand, rock, and moss to create the similar, the concept of the gardens as the pond strolling type of the gardens. And this is examples of our temple, Taizo-in. So this garden is called as a garden by Motonobu. So Motonobu was a very famous painter, lived around 500 years ago, and he's a second generation of the canon painting school. So normally this kind of the dry garden was designed by the Zen priests or special gardeners, but this garden was created by the painter, so this is a very rare garden. Because Motonobu was a painter, but he also trained in the Myoshinji as a Buddhist priest. And the concept of this garden is that normally painters looking at the scenery and he drew the picture, but this is the opposite. So Motonobu first drew his paintings on the sliding doors with his imagination. And then he wanted to express that two-dimensional picture world into three-dimensional real world. So I'm afraid in picture, it doesn't bloom cherry blossoms in spring, so the colors of the leaves doesn't change in the autumn, so picture is always stable, it's of course. So the scenery of this garden cannot be changed by the seasons. So you can see the area is covered all evergreen trees, always green even in the winter time. So the gardens reflect the time. So now cherry blossoms and maple leaves, these kind of the colorful, gorgeous garden is very popular. But in old Kyoto, it was not that. So of course, cherry blossoms and maple leaves are very beautiful, but it just only 10 days or 2 weeks. But as to this garden, so anytime you come to this garden, so feel beauty in old Kyoto. So this garden was created around 500 years ago. So that's why this garden represents the kind of the traditional philosophy of beauty in old Kyoto. And actually, after the COVID-19 situation, so the first state of emergency was declared by the government last April and May in Japan. And we had almost no visitors, nothing to do. And suddenly we had plenty of time. So actually, you can see the white sand in the garden, but because of the scarce of the resource, so we cannot get this sand anymore. So this sand is originally from Kyoto in the mountains, but we cannot get the white sand anymore. So that's why we decided to clean all the sands in the garden. I think this is the first time in 500 years history. And because of the clean, it took more than 10 days, but it get very refreshed, very white. And within this 500 years, the history, some dust and the soil was in the garden, but we could remove everything. So we can find original the stones from the bottom of the white sand. So now we can enjoy original dry garden, first time in 500 years. Thanks to the coronavirus, so we can recover the original design of the gardens. And actually, so the designer was the painter. So that's why the designer designed this garden as the frame of the sliding doors looks like the frame of the picture. So he was a painter, so that's why he designed as it is. And we have another style of the gardens. So we call this garden as yin and yang garden, so black and white garden. So this garden is a quite new garden. So this garden was created around 60 years ago. So before that, this area is covered by bamboos. But bamboos bloom a white flower every 80 to 100 years. But once they bloom a flower, next year, most of them they will die. So around 60 years ago, it blew a flower, and next year, most of them died. So the manager at that time decided to cut all of them and created this beautiful garden. And this is a kind of the traditional Zen garden. But this kind of the garden have very important teachings of Buddhism. And I'm afraid that this garden is a quite big garden, so I couldn't take the garden only in one photos. But in the black garden, we can find 8 rocks in the garden. And in the white garden, we can find 7 rocks in the garden. So 8 in the black, 7 in the white. So 7 and 8 doesn't mean a lot, but 7 plus 8, 15 is a very important figure from ancient times in Japan. So 15 is perfection. And in Buddhism, there's a very important teaching that we have to go beyond, or we have to avoid dualism. So dualism means, for example, we tend to judge people. He's a good person, or he's a bad person. But for example, within myself, I have a good aspect, and also I have a bad aspect, and it's always changing. So that's why in Buddhism, there are the teachings that we have to accept all the aspects as they are. So that's why we created this kind of the contrast garden here, black and white. But when you enjoy the garden, please enjoy the whole garden. And we can count 15. So we tend to see only a good aspect of the bad aspect, but it is not a good way to see things. So this is very important teachings of Buddhism. And another characteristics of Zen is that, of course, we express our teachings by the preach or the text or the words. But the Zen is said the religion of awareness. So we express our teachings by the questions, paintings, gardens, and the cookings. So we express our teaching by many means. So we have to feel the teachings using 5 senses. So this is another characteristics of Zen. And so some people ask me, so why should we rake the garden? So there's a patterns. So in the video, they say that, so they wanted to express the flow of the water and the land by the moss and the mountains from the rocks. Of course, so it is aesthetic reasons in the gardens. But another very important reason is that, so I don't think you have any chances to rake the garden before, but if you have a chance to rake the garden, you will find it's not so difficult to rake round shape around the rock. But most difficult thing is that when you rake long straight lines. So if you think wrong, the line winds. And if you try to make it straight, line winds. So the point of the straight line is that we have to hold the raker light, and we walk as we walk, and we look a little bit far. And by raking the garden every day, often, so we naturally get mindful, get concentrated. So of course, we highly cherish meditation, seated meditation. We call it the zazen. So, but we highly cherish moving meditation, like raking gardens, cleaning, mopping the floor, or the cookings, calligraphies. So these are the kind of the moving meditations. So especially in Zen temples, so gardens is regarded as a place of the trainings. Right. And so this picture was taken at the end of the year. So sometimes we have snowfall. I'm afraid today we do not have this much snow. But so this picture is also taken at the end of the year. So this year we have very warm November, but very cold December. So I think this is my first time to have the collaboration of the maple leaves and the snowfall this year. And so this is modern garden created around 60 years ago. So this garden has the opposite concept. So we can enjoy the seasons. So in spring times, in the beginning of April, we have full of pink flower here. So if you have a chance to come to Kyoto, I highly recommend you to visit here in the beginning of April. And so I am in charge of the raking. So I rake the garden like this. And another the examples of the rock garden is a very famous rock garden in Ryoanji. So like this, as I said, in Ryoan, so this is a very famous World Heritage Gardens. I think some of you have been to this garden. And actually, this garden has also 15 rocks in the garden. And we can enjoy the garden from the terrace of the Buddha Hall like this. And anywhere you go in the terrace, you will never see all the 15 rocks at a time. So you can see only 13 or 14 rocks. So you will miss 1 or 2 rocks. So the garden designed as it is. And as I said, the 15 means perfection, perfect. So there's many understandings, but one understanding is that so we cannot see all the 15 rocks at a time. So it means human beings cannot be perfect at any time. We are imperfect. Another understanding is that so from different point of view, the garden looks differently. So if you look at only if you looking at the same things, so your vision is not the only one. So there's many ways to understand the things. And so another important thing is that the color of the sand. So some people said why the color of the sand is white. It can be blue or it can be red. Of course, there are some gardens whose sand is blue or red. But as to this garden, it should be white because this garden is practical garden. So it means, so in old days, in ancient times, we did not have electricity. So if we spread white sand around hole, it reflects the light, moonlight, sunlight, and the room gets lighter. So that's why they use the white sand reflection for the living. So that's why they use the white sand around the hall. Yes. And so the second thing is the pond gardens. So, so this is the example of our garden, so Yokoen. So actually this garden is also created 60 years ago. The designed by the Kinsaku Nakane, who is regarded one of the best Japanese garden design of this 100 years. And he created very beautiful Japanese garden in Boston Museum of Fine Arts in Massachusetts, USA, or a Japanese embassy in Singapore. So he created more than 300 gardens all over the world. So the point of this garden is that if you see this picture, there's a steep end that's higher, and the garden is surrounded by high trees, and it looks deeper than it is. So he used a kind of the perspectives, and the garden is forward. This garden is to the eastward, so the moon comes behind a tree here, so we can enjoy very beautiful home in this garden. And so this picture is also taken at the end of the year when sun rises. And in autumn, we have some the maple trees here, so we can enjoy a very beautiful momiji color, and so something like this. So we can enjoy 4 seasons in this garden. And another good examples of the pond garden is the Golden Temple. Actually, I took this picture last week. So in Kyoto, we have very freezing cold in January. So can you recognize the surface of the pond is freezing, all frozen here. So the reflection is very beautiful, but all frozen. So the picture is taken by me last week. So this is also very good examples of the pond garden, right? And the last example is the tea gardens. So in the video, they also said that tea is one of the most important cultures in Japan. And actually, tea was introduced to Japan from China by the founder of Zen's. So the tea was originally from China, and they drank tea in the Zen monasteries. And the trainings in the monastery is very strict, even now. And especially, we have only 4 or 5 hours a day to sleep. So we're always sleepy. So when we enjoy thick green tea, it helps us awake. So that's why the tea was introduced to Japan as a medicine to wake us up. But after some time, they found that it is, of course, good, helps us awake, but it's good for digestions. And also, so coffee is also helps us awake, but it has a, how can I say, remedy for excitement. But when we enjoy the tea, it helps us to be calm. So the founder wrote a book about the tea, and around 500 years ago in Japan, the tea master, whose name was Senno Rikyu, completed Tea World, and now, even now, we have a very deep relationships between Tea World and the Zens. And there's a phrase in tea that Chazen Ichimi, it means tea and the Zen is one and the same, so we cannot separate. So every big Buddhist ceremonies, we have a time to enjoy the tea. And also, the most tea masters study Zens when they was a trainee in the tea ceremonies. So we have still have a very deep relationships in Zen and teas. And in most Zen temples of the tea house, so this is an approach to the tea house in our gardens. So we can see the stepping stones. So by stepping stone is a very important approach to the, how can I say, we're going out of the daily lives. So it is an approach to the not ordinary world. And so this is, you can find the water basin in front of the tea house, because tea house is regarded as a sacred place. So we have to purify ourselves. So in front of the tea house, we can find the water basin. And so this is a tea house. And normally we have very small entrance for the tea house, because in times of the warriors, they carried the sword, but the tea house is regarded as a sacred place. So they attached a very small entrance so that they couldn't carry a sword in the tea house. And also, so tea house is a sacred place, so that's why, so at any positions they had to bow before entering. So we have to be humble when we enter the tea house. So that's why they attached a very small entrance in the tea house. So this kind of the teachings comes from the teachings of Buddhism. So so the gardens are very much influenced by the religions, especially the Buddhism and Zens. So next time you have a chance to come to Kyoto and in Japan, please enjoy the garden from the teachings of the lectures. So thank you very much for listening. And I only have had a chance to visit India only for twice. Once around, the first time was 10 years ago for the pilgrimage visit to Buddha Gaya and the Varanasi and the Uttar Pradesh, the state. And the second time was 3-4 years ago on the way to Bhutan. So, but I really want to visit India again in the near future after the COVID-19 situation. So I hope you may have a chance to come to Japan, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in India or in Japan in person in the near future. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a question.
Yes.
And a couple of things to say. You know, this has been a very fascinating talk. Thank you so much. You've brought out so many similarities between our Hindu traditions and Buddhist traditions. The last one you mentioned was the doorway where you have to bow before entering. And we have the same concept here in India when you go into small villages and you see doors which are not too tall, they're short, for exactly the same reason. You bow down. So you leave your ego behind as well as your shoes before entering the house.
Yeah.
That was one thing. The gardens in the houses evoked a very sharp memory of a little Japanese garden that we had in our house once upon a time. My mother was doing ikebana, and I think she must have been influenced by that. So there was a little corner in the garden which had a little, it was a little rise, and it had pebbles and water, a water body, and the green plants as well. And I think some of the other members might have memories of these or still have them in their own homes. And lastly, I want to know, you said you have a center here in India. Can you tell us where, please?
Yeah. It is located in the Buddha Gaya, and we have a kind of branch there because we have many Japanese people for the pilgrimage to the home country, India. So, so one young the priests are appointed to stay there to welcome the pilgrimage people from Japan, and also we have kind of the friendship, the can I say promoting friendship between other sector of Buddhism from other countries. So that's why we built the temple in India.
Okay. Thank you very much.
May I say something, please? There's a lovely Japanese garden which came up in 1989-90 in Pune at Osho Ashram on a stream. So it's a pond garden. So I don't know how many of us have seen it or are aware of it. That's the time when we were in Pune. So the permission had to be given from the government to the Osho Ashram disciples to build this beautiful, lengthy Japanese garden on a stream, which was actually a waste stream, or what we call in India nalas, where they had fish, they had flora, fauna, bridges, everything, the kind which we saw just now. So I think that must be the only example in India of a Japanese garden of that magnitude, which exists in Pune at the
Osho Ashram. Yeah.
Right.
Still now, Anita-san?
So question I've always wondered, Yuka, why the buildings or the homes in Japan have stilts. Is it because there has to be a garden in the courtyard? They're slightly raised. Most of them, they're raised on stilts. Like we saw here also, the house which had two gardens, one which got sun, one which didn't, it was slightly on stilts. So most of them are built on stilts. So
I think one of the reasons is that we have sometimes the flood. So because of the monsoon typhoon, so sometimes we have very heavy rains, and so that's why we keep the houses higher. And the other one is the reason is that the humidity, especially in Kyoto. We have it's the style of the gardens are different from Tokyo and Kyoto. The Tokyo is basically grass garden, and the Kyoto is a moss garden because of the difference of the humidity. And the Tokyo has less humidity, and Kyoto has more humidity. And so of course in summertime we have a very humid and hot in Kyoto. So that's what we wanted to have the natural air under the house to have the refreshing the airs.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's a very interesting talk. We learned a lot this morning.
Thank you very much.
Oh yes.
I guess we have a question already coming in from Sima-san, Sima Bara-san. How are the dry garden maintained? How do you go across to look after the plants, which would displace the gravel that might not sit back in the original design? Could you kindly answer?
Very good question. So we have our gardens are designated as a kind of the garden's national treasure. Of course, national treasures should not be changed, but because the plants are living, so of course it grows. But so we have the very precise plan of the gardens. Of course, some tree dies, so we have to replant the same species in the same place, in almost in the same shapes, and twice a year. So we asked to help the special gardeners to help us for the trimming, especially some trees like pine trees. Also, we have to remove each leaves up one by hands. So so it takes a lot of time and efforts to keep the garden in the same shapes. But 250 years ago, in Kyoto, there is a book published in Kyoto, a kind of the guidebook of beautiful gardens in Kyoto. In that books, our gardens are planted in that books, but so it is has a very precise paintings in the book, and within these 250 years, almost no change, except for one big change. There was a plaque on the rock. So rock has a big plaque, which was created by the nature. So only one difference, but mostly it is preserved as they were about 250 years ago.
Wow. So I guess Pavin-san's question it's already been asked and answered, I guess, which would be the one in India, Zen temple. So is there other questions?
Yuke-san?
Oh, yeah.
I lived in the heart of Tokyo for 4 years. I was in Yotsuya, and in my area, you know, I was so close to, there were Shinjuku Dori with all the buildings, and at the back, when I was getting out of my building, there was this area with smaller houses, and just what I loved was the small gardens that was just, you know, in the streets. And very often they have those, what we saw in the Kyoto, movie, that's this type of pottery, you see, where you have a small fish in it that was water and some water plant as well. That means the heart of an urban city. They were still connected really with nature and you know, with the little
Hi, Vinu, good to see you. Good to see you, Vinu.
Good to see you.
Yeah, great to see you.
Great to see you.
You're really lovely.
Wonderful. You're looking great.
So happy you joined us for this wonderful talk.
Good to see you.
Yes. Well, there's another one from Rita-san. How do you clean the rock garden when the trees shed their leaves or flowers?
Yeah, so I clean every day in the rainy season and also in the autumn. So this time of the year, in the winter time, we have almost no rainfall and no leaves fallen. So I can rake it only once a week or 10 days. So that's why I love winter. But in the rainy season or in the fall, so I have to rake it every day.
So it's a moving meditation, as you said, and mindfulness. Because I remember a few years back when we visited Japan, I couldn't see a single dirty car there. All the cars were sparkling, and I was told this is the first thing which is done in the morning as a part of the meditation to clean your car. So mindfulness and meditation.
Yeah. I think this is a very important point. And actually, 2 years ago, Dr. Shirakawa, so he got the Nobel Prize in the chemistry in Kyoto University, and he invented the lithium-ion battery. So without his invention, we cannot talk through the laptop. And in his lecture, he said very interesting things. And when he got the idea of the lithium-ion battery for the first time, when he was cleaning his rubbers. So I think he has a kind of very the questions and the ideas in his brains. But of course, when we clean the gardens, of course we clean the garden, but at the same time we are cleaning our mind. Yeah. So the cleaning is a very important activity to have the right mind and like I said, make the things in order. So that's why so in every Japanese elementary school, we have the time for the cleaning for every students. Pupil are supposed to participate in the cleanings. So I think the education of the cleaning is very important especially for the pupils, elementary schools. Yes.
This is the concept as you had explained initially. You run for the sake of running, not for any other motivation. So this is a continuation of that same idea, that same concept. Yeah. I think, yes.
I think so. So we regard the cleaning is as of course, as a matter of course. So it is very usual everyday activities. So I think this kind of the education should be more important in the future.
Well, another interesting one coming from also Sima-san, which I also wanted to ask actually, how do you walk across the gravel and sand pattern without disturbing the design? I always wondered.
This is top secret, but I walk backwards, okay, holding the gravel and backwards, and I basically I rake the straight lines first, and rake the round shape, and jump out. Yes.
Yeah, I would say something that from my experience of living in Japan and going to those wonderful gardens, and I came back regularly because my son is living in Japan. It's a feast for our Western eyes with all the different seasons, but it's also, and most important, it's a moment that is suspended. Whenever you're entering a Japanese garden, there is a peaceful atmosphere, and that's what is important. You just it's a moment of rest when you are walking into a Japanese garden, and certainly to do with the meditation, with the Zen, and that's really something because of the structure of the garden, because of the shape. There is a peaceful moment when you're walking into a Japanese garden.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Anita would like Anita Miyata. Anita, you have to unmute yourself.
This has been a most fascinating lecture. Thank you, Reverend.
Thank you very much.
I have reached a state of Zen just listening.
All of us.
All of us.
Japan is very near to my heart. About 5 years ago, my husband was invited to Gifu to give a keynote speech at a horticultural show because he himself has learned how to grow fresh air. Even in a city like Delhi, his office building has mountain fresh air. So he was invited there to come and speak on what he is best at, and has been wonderful. Japan is a beautiful country. And one more thing I'll tell you, Reverend, when you visited Varanasi, you would have gone to Sarnath. The temple there was built by my grandfather.
Oh, really? Well, thank you very much.
Wow.
Anita-san.
For a beautiful morning spent with you in Japan in these beautiful gardens. It has been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was very
Thank you so
wonderful.
much.
And we should try to be mindful in our lives from now.
Absolutely.
In fact, another thing that really struck me, in Kyoto when we were there, we went to a restaurant and our food, when it came to our table, it felt like a garden. They put all the vegetables in the garden. It was beautiful.
Presentation is wonderful.
Yes, we didn't touch the food because it was looking so beautiful.
I remember that we had been to Japan when I was still in school, and I remember going to a Japanese home, and the way the food was laid out, the color combination, on the platter, it was something exquisite. This is my memory of Japan. Everything was so beautiful. Thank you. Thank you.
You almost don't feel like disturbing it. It's so beautifully presented.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
What a wonderful morning.
Wonderful talk.
Wonderful morning.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Food for the mind and food for the eyes.
Great.
Yes, so
feast for the eyes and feast for the soul and feast for the mind. Thank you very much.
Yes. Yes, it is.
Yes, thank
so Reverend Matsuyama, thank you. So Anita Metal-san is our current WIC president, and she already gave a very nice remarks for this program. But once again, maybe Anita-san and our Vice President Lina-san, if you could, make a few words in the end to thank Reverend Matsuyama, that would be nice.
Thank you.
Anita, I think. Anita?
Yes. Like I said, take it to a different plane altogether. I am in a state of Zen just now, and it's been a beautiful morning with you in Japan.
Exquisite, exquisite.
Yes, it has been. Thank you. And thank you, Sakiko, for arranging this.
Thank you, Daiko-san. Daiko Matsuyama. Thank you so much.
Thank you
so much.
Really enjoyed the talk. Beautiful.
Transported to another world, Zen world.
Lovely. We forgot in Delhi, in Japan. Lovely.
Yes, absolutely.
Super experience. Super. Thank you. Thank you so much.